Welcome to LSAT Daily. I'm Josh Mansfield, and joining me today to tell his success story is Connor. Connor, welcome so much to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So let's start. The most exciting part, of course, always. You took the September test. Is that correct?
Actually, August.
It was August. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We're a little behind getting you on here then. So you took August. What score did you get?
Yeah, so I ended up with a 174 on the August test, which, very, very happy with.
174, definitely. I think it's the best score. It's the score I got as well. So it's
Yeah, a little biased.
anyone hires a try hard. We're the cool kids who did like just good enough that we got like the best possible score without looking weird about it. So
Yeah,
174 is it. That's for sure.
that was my goal. So
Perfect. All right, perfect. If it's your goal score too, it's funny. I told my wife that once I got a 174, I'd be happy because I knew it'd get me the scholarships I wanted at a closer school. So
yeah.
it's a great number. What was your starting score? Cold diagnostic or kind of the one that sticks out in your head as your starting point?
Yeah, so I feel like I actually had two because I started studying last summer. So before logic games went away, I figured,
Okay.
okay, I can kind of do a diagnostic. I think it was in like, it was pretty early. It was like March of last year. So, oh gosh, so that would have been 2024, I guess.
Yeah.
So that would have been a
Yeah.
long time
Okay.
ago. I ended up getting a 150 on that one. I was pretty disheartened because I didn't feel like I did very well. Came back after Logic Games was being removed. I was like, all right, I can kind of hit the ground running, get really good at this, and not have to worry about my worst section.
Hmm.
Took a diagnostic in August of last year and
Okay.
only got a 153. So
Okay.
not much of a difference.
All right. All right.
So that's kind of what I think of as my diagnostic.
Okay. All right. So we're starting out, and I guess I want to back up even a little bit further. What inspired you to decide like, okay, I want to see how the LSAT goes for me? Whether you knew you were going to law school or was this just like I'm going to test the waters?
Yeah, so I actually had a lot of friends who were interested in going to law school. My roommate had taken the LSAT the year before,
Okay.
and they were, really great people. Really, kind of, I looked to them to see kind of what they were doing because I was kind of bereft, like didn't really know what to do in my career. And I'd also had a bunch of family health issues that kind of led for me to kind of look at law a little differently and kind of be interested in it. So kind of taking those lessons, I decided, you know what, I think I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring at the LSAT and, maybe think about a legal career. And then I kind of just, put the pedal to the metal once I decided to actually go for it.
Good for you. Awesome. Okay, so you kind of do this like dance around when the logic games are going away, but you take your what you call the official cold diagnostic in August of 2024. So that's about 1 year before you took your official test, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I
Okay.
actually had quite a few administrations before my last administration.
Okay,
So
all right. So let's talk about that. When was the first administration that you took of the test?
yeah, so I actually started in February of 2025. So I
Okay.
took a good amount of time to study before.
Yep.
I was really happy with my first score. I ended up with a 167
Okay.
on my first score, but it was well below my practice scores. At that point,
Okay.
I was
So you
PT.
did wait until your practice test scores were in the right range to take it.
Yes, yeah. I
Good.
was
Good.
I was a big listener to the podcast,
Okay.
Demon Daily, thinking LSAT. I was super
Hmm.
involved in, all of the mottos and the sayings. So I waited, was
Okay.
PTing 175 plus, and then just
Great.
absolutely tanked it on test day with a 167. I was disheartened, but I thought, okay, I'm just gonna keep going at it. I'm at the point where I want to in my studying. I'm just gonna keep working, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
I took it the next test, which would have been, gosh, April of that
Okay.
year. So then I ended up getting a 172, which I
Okay.
was very happy with.
Yep.
But I was like, that's right on that, kind of cusp of where I wanted to be, especially with how crazy last cycle was. I was like, it looks like everything's going insane. I feel like I might as well get another test under my belt to see if I can do better because my
Okay.
PTing was close to 180 at that point.
Okay.
Which I was like, all right, I can get better than this.
Yeah.
And then I took another test. I took it like every 2 months, so it's kind of like moving on my brain. I took it in June of 2025 with another 172, which was just like a smack to the face because I was like, what am I doing at this point? I'm taking it again. And at that point,
Yep.
I was really starting applications for this cycle right now.
Mhm.
And I was really kind of debating whether or not to take another administration. And I talked with my girlfriend and some friends, and I was kind of like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go for it and take another administration and just see kind of how it plays out. I took the August administration, and I felt really good about it after the day. Popped out with a 174, and I decided to call it before hitting my fifth attempt, and I was pretty happy with what I ended up with.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're making that decision between the 172 and the 174, what was kind of weighing on your mind and what ultimately pushed you to actually taking August?
Yeah, so I'm someone who really kind of bought into the LSAT demon, like, kind of ethos of, don't pay for law school, and also kind of, you know, get kind of what you want to out of this process, I guess. I knew that my scores were better than what I had put down on test day. And I knew that, for all the time that I'd spent, I'd studied for almost a full calendar year by the time my August score came out. I'm like, I've put this much time into it, kind of like sunk cost in a way. I'm like, I'm going to get the score that I want out of this. I'm not just going to settle with a 172, which is a great score by all means.
Hmm.
But I knew that I had more to give and that I wanted to, put my all into this. And I decided I was going to do that. And thankfully it, ended up the way it did.
Awesome. That's incredible. Let's start by talking when you first started studying. You got your 153, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got your 153 diagnostic. Where did you turn to? What was kind of like your, okay, this is what I'm going to do for studying?
Yeah. So I actually didn't start off with LSAT Demon. I
Okay.
actually started off with a different prep company, kind of went through their, core curriculum. And then family members were super excited that I was starting the LSAT. And so they would, hey, look, I found this book on sale. You can look at this. And so that
They
was
mean
kind of,
well. They mean well.
yeah, they meant super well, and I still have all the books. They're still sitting upstairs.
Hmm.
I kind of looked at every avenue. I got super into the Reddit rabbit hole, trying to find
Sure.
just all the information I could. And after I would just really wasn't clicking, like I really wasn't seeing, increases in my practice tests during that kind of August, September time period last year. I was taking them way too frequently, just as an aside. I was, really, really looking to try to find a place that would kind of fit with me. And I stumbled upon LSAT Demon after, listening to the podcast for forever. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a try. I'll just do a month and see if it works. Did drilling exclusively. And then after my first month, I took a practice test and went up to 165. And I was floored. I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm here for it. Let's do it. So that was kind of the start of my testing, and then I just kind of, took the daily 1 hour at a time, keep working at it until I decided I was ready in February.
Yeah. When you were doing that drilling, what what plan did you have with the demon?
Yeah, so I had just the basic plan, I believe.
Okay.
It was, or not the basic plan. I had the one that was the one before live. I can't remember what it's
So
called
the
right.
premium.
Yes, because I
Okay.
wanted to go through. I really struggled with sufficient necessary
Okay.
issues in the beginning, and so I wanted kind of that, explanation in a written form that would really help with me.
Sure.
So I used that. I used drilling, and then I used kind of just the general ask button to kind of propel my studying.
Okay, so you described with this other prep company that you spent the first 2 months doing curriculum and practice tests,
hmm
and then you still look for a lesson to kind of describe some of these details. What was different about the kind of mentality and approach during your time with the demon that got you to the 165 versus when you're doing this broad curriculum in the first 2 months?
Yeah, so something that kind of stood out to me with the demon is that it wasn't nearly as like I guess to use the term mechanistic as a lot of the other
Okay.
companies were. Like the other companies, as I'm sure you know, got super into jargon, really into the weeds.
Hmm.
And I took a couple of formal logic classes in undergrad, and I just hated them. I was, I'm not someone who it clicked in my brain to try to
Hmm.
do like very jargony words. And so when I came to LSAT Demon, kind of just the way that they explained things in just normal terms, like kind of taking familiar examples and trying to apply them to very broad topics and also very specific topics that kept cropping up on the LSAT, such as the sufficient necessary flaw, really kind of just made sense to me. Like it felt kind of like constant breakthroughs that I just wasn't experiencing when I'm like bashing my head on the wall trying to figure out like, what's the flaw in this specific sentence? Like, where's the subject? Where's the claim? I'm like diagramming and I'm like writing so much and it just wasn't working for me.
Do you feel like, so you've been down the Reddit rabbit hole, and I'm familiar with the Reddit posts that talk about how LSAT Demon isn't good if you don't know the basics, right? That's
Mhm.
the, I think, the most common complaint that people I see from people on there. Do you feel like you needed to have a foundation that you got from the other curriculum before you could engage with the demon material? Or do you wish you had just jumped straight to the demon material?
I wish I had just jumped straight to the demon material, because to be frank, I kind of tried to make myself forget all of the original material. Not to disparage any other company, like they do great things and help out a lot of people, but just for me specifically, it just didn't work in my head.
Hmm.
And so kind of that way of trial and error and actually going through drilling and learning and then trying to find specific points where I was struggling on flaws and then going and looking at like a brief explanation really helped me out. And if I had done that, 2 months earlier, who's to say I wouldn't have had like, one less attempt? I think have,
Right.
repeated my 172, which, I don't know, but I definitely, if I could go back, would have just, started with the demon in the first place.
Yeah. It's funny because I asked that question I've got no clue what your answer is going to be, right? But generally when we're talking with people, I find that those who continue to latch on to like the diagramming, or even if they're not writing it down, but the diagramming mindset, right?
Mhm.
The idea that I need to break it out, I need to sort it into certain places in order to then engage with the material in this, like you said, mechanistic way. It's people who hold on to that, but then just quit writing it down, don't see the same kind of breakthroughs. It really is an unlearning process, or hopefully you'd never have done that before, and you just learn to come and read, right? And I'm so glad that you talked, because you'll occasionally see on Reddit as well. Today's just bash on Reddit. We're not bashing other companies, we're just bashing Reddit. Reddit is not the bastion of all truth, everybody, in case you were shocked by this information. Um, I think it's really interesting. So you didn't feel like your formal logic like sets you up for success with the LSAT, or is like the preemptor to the LSAT.
Yeah, no, not at all. Actually, like as I was trying to break through that 172 plateau,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of realized, as you said, that these like kind of paralleling, oh my gosh, like diagramming mindsets were kind of like ingrained in the way that I looked
Mm-hmm.
at specifically LR problems. And I had to kind of break through that to be able to realize, okay, this is a simple passage with a simple problem that I can, I know how to solve as long as I don't kind of revert in like an instinctual way into this, diagramming like XYZ mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to break through that was really difficult, but I learned, kind of just making it simpler made things so much easier. And that was kind of, spurred on by LSAT Demon and listening to, you know, um, just their teachers and everyone in general just saying, hey, don't overthink it.
Yeah, yeah. You described at the beginning of your studying doing lots of practice tests, and then during your next month when you had your breakthrough, exclusively drilling. Why do you feel like exclusively drilling allowed you to get better at the LSAT over just grinding practice tests?
Yeah, so I actually, specifically for me, I had a big issue with timing to start.
Okay.
I was someone who would get kind of really stressed out about trying to, make time, make a certain time. When I was younger, when I would study, I'd always try to finish fast and then go back and check answers that I wasn't sure about,
Mm-hmm.
which is not what I do on the LSAT. But trying to do that on practice tests, especially when I didn't know a lot, just didn't yield results. I wasn't learning anything. I was making the same kinds of mistakes over and over. And I actually kind of wrote into LSAT, Demon. And I remember I specifically asked, I was like, hey, how do I fix, my time problem or whatever? And he goes, don't look at the clock. Like it was that simple. And I'm like, I don't look at the clock. And he's like, you're looking at the clock. And kind of in that, I realized, okay, maybe I should not do a timed kind of an idea. Maybe I should do more drilling. And that really allowed for me to kind of pinpoint where I was struggling,
Mm.
and kind of actually figure out the content, trying to figure out how the test was written and what it was testing for. And that really, I think, I attribute to that massive jump from like the 150s, like low 150s I was scoring in to the 165 once I took that practice test after that like month of drilling.
What was your review process like when you missed a question while drilling?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I had a wrong answer journal that I like swore by. I quickly threw that away, just because I really liked the idea of going through it, but then I realized that I was kind of doing it just for the ritual of doing it, and I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't trying to actually internalize it. What I would end up doing is I would utilize like the notes app on LSAT Demon, and I would write out specifically why every answer was correct or not correct. And if I didn't understand it, I really tried to leverage the ask button, to try to really ask them questions. And I asked like so many stupid questions those first couple of months. Like I just pestered you guys with, random questions, like the same questions over and over about parallel reasoning. But just continually trying to get better and learn those flaws that I just was not connecting in my brain for some reason. Eventually ended up clicking after enough repetition and kind of, getting down to the basics of why I wasn't connecting them.
For those of you at home who perhaps haven't drilled on our platform, every question with every plan, if you can be a free member, you can access our Ask button, where you get to, after you do the problem, you can write in, and we have a team of, I think it's like north of 50 people at this point, between volunteers and the different ranges of tutors that we have doing that, and they all respond. Did you ever get a response that was later than 24 hours?
I would be shocked if I ever did. Like
Okay,
they
I
would
don't.
normally come in like under an hour, and I
Yeah.
would be and I would be just thrilled.
And you'd still be studying too, right?
Yeah, I'd be like
Yeah,
in the midst of drilling, and it'd like pop up as a notification or like an email.
that was always our goal. I mean, we loved when we got it in before, and Billy does a great job with his team over there. And we loved when we could get it in, while you're still studying. But our goal, and I don't know what I mean. I was on the Ask button for a long time, and I don't know of any time we didn't hit that 24-hour mark. So you'll always get an answer within 24 hours, and you can go back and forth, which sounds like you took advantage of, Connor.
Oh yeah, I had like conversations of like, oh my gosh, I get it. I'd send in things that I'm sure just annoy ask button people like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I get this one. I didn't get my last question. And not even a question. They'd be like, great job. Like just so nice and supportive. As I'm sure
Good.
they're like, okay, I gotta get to my other questions.
Great. What were the things that you found to be the most difficult for you when you were studying? Are there points that you kind of got hung up, that you felt like it took longer for you to get that breakthrough?
Yeah, the first kind of major obstacle for me was, parallel reasoning questions. When I saw just that brick of text and I wasn't very good at identifying flaws or kind of, getting down even to just the most basic understanding of what the argument was asking, I really, really struggled with them. Like I kind of looked at them as just, okay, I'll hold them till the end. Like I'm just not good at parallel reasoning, and I'm just gonna fix it later. But through, just continually working at it, like just forcing myself to do them, and kind of, practicing and kind of shoring up my skills in other question sets and question types, I kind of really developed, a love for parallel reasoning. It kind of became one of my easiest questions, actually, or question types. And, just continually kind of learning to develop skills and kind of build upon each other rather than kind of in isolation was something that kind of helped me, topple obstacles that I'd approach, like, throughout my studying history, especially when I got towards the end where, every question, even just the smallest little mistake, takes you off your goal target score.
Hmm.
That process really helped me.
Yeah, I mean, when you're scoring a 174, you're missing one, maybe two questions per section. It is not a
Yeah.
lot of margin of error. That's for sure. You've described a lot about your time in logical reasoning, kind of in drilling, some of the lessons that you used, some of the problems that you had. What was reading comprehension like for you?
Yeah, so reading comprehension was actually really different from my experience with logical reasoning. Growing up, I've always, loved like reading tests and passages. I read a lot by myself in my personal life. So reading comprehension was definitely my best, section by
Yeah.
far. I would score probably -3 even when I started on my diagnostic almost every time. And so I kind of let it to the wayside, honestly. Like I didn't study nearly as much. But as I realized, kind of going back through, trying to study and break through that high score plateau, is that I wasn't giving reading comprehension nearly enough, focus as I should be. Like I was kind of dropping points on the test, I thought, because of my reading comprehension. And so towards these last couple months of studying, like, over the summer and over last spring, I really tried to not only focus on reading comprehension, drilling, and just doing sections. Like there was a point where I was doing, like not a full section, but like a full question, passage, like every
Yeah.
day, like multiple times a day. And then I would read by myself, like more dense literature and texts, and trying to just understand what they were saying and then summarize them to my poor girlfriend or, my cat who was sitting next to me. Just trying to develop that really helped me break through that. But, you know, coming from someone who had like a better baseline than some other people, like you know, I didn't really experience a ton of difficulty in that section as I did in logical reasoning.
Yeah. Um, when you were doing the other test prep company, so you mentioned that you felt better about RC anyways.
Mhm.
When you were studying with that other company, did they have gimmicky advice for RC? Like, highlighting the first and last sentences, or skipping the words for example. There's so much advice out there. Was there gimmicky advice for RC?
Yeah, I definitely remember gimmicky advice. Like I remember like, the highlighting, the
Hmm.
read the questions first was
Yeah.
probably the worst advice that I've heard. I remember seeing it. But even just from, just how I've always done reading comprehension kind of questions, I was like, that doesn't really sound, like the best way to go about this. And so once I got to, LSAT Demon and they were like, hey, forget all of that stuff. I was like, cool. Sounds great to me. That sounds intuitive. So I really
Good.
kind of jumped on that immediately.
Okay, okay. So you really didn't implement that too strictly because you felt so good about RC to begin with.
Yeah, I felt good about it.
Good.
I did use the highlight quite a bit before, just because it was so. I remember it being so hammered in, like, hey, highlight this, see the subject, highlight your main point, or try to
Uh-huh.
find your main point and highlight it. And so I tried to do that, and I do think it kind of hampered my full understanding of the passages that I was reading. But once I got to LSAT Demon, they were like, hey, just read, and it
It's
helped a lot.
it's so funny because so I'm a 1L right now, and I started with the demon method. So I never highlighted. I never broke out a highlighter once on LSAT, right? I just never did it. I get to law school, I start reading cases, and what's the first thing I do? Well, I grab a highlighter and I start marking cases up. And I
Yeah.
go to class and I was like missing 10% probably of the information, like the nuance that like I just wasn't picking up on. And my professor would say it and I was like, there's no way that was in the case. I go back and I read it, and sure enough, and I was like, maybe I just need to quit highlighting. So I just started like reading the case like I did an LSAT, and then took my notes afterwards. And I was like, this is it's anyway. It's great prep, and I love that you use other material, right? Describing dense literature, for example, as a practice, because that's what the LSAT is meant to prep us to do, right? It's meant to prep us to read cases, dense literature, dense materials, and so I love that this style of reading converted over when you were reading a book. Like, have you ever read a book where you're like told, like you're like, oh yeah, highlight all these things in the main point of a book? Like, no, it's
Yeah. I'm
ludicrous.
reading A Clockwork Orange right now for Banned Books
Okay.
Week.
Uh-huh.
Very, very, I've never read it before. I've never seen the movie. I was like, oh, I'll read it, I'll pick it up. And just the insane way that it's written and just how difficult it is to parse through it. If I were to try to highlight any of it, it would just go right over my head. And so
Yes.
that kind of process I'm even seeing pop up in like, my reading for joy or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's never gonna go away. This is a question that is a little bit loaded because I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Do you feel like the way that you read or the way that you think has changed since your LSAT journey started?
Oh, for sure. And you can ask my girlfriend, especially when I was studying. She might say not for the better in some
Okay.
instances. But I would definitely say it has. I feel a lot more analytical when I'm reading, and trying to specifically look at different parts of text and sentences as part of like, a broader argument or a broader story, that the book is trying to tell me or that the
Mm-hmm.
piece is trying to tell me. And I had a little bit of that through my undergrad because I was very in a liberal arts major, in international relations and public policy. So kind of my professors would try to get me to do that a lot. And that was something that I was taught to do. But honestly, until I started reading through the LSAT and studying and kind of learning with the demon, I didn't really put that into practice or into my daily life, until, I actually had to.
Right, right.
I had to see like, tangible differences in my life with that. Um,
When six figure debt was like the reward,
oh yeah,
or getting rid of six figure debt is the reward for doing it right this time.
for sure. And so I've definitely seen that, crop up in my daily life. And even just, I'm sure everyone who has ever taken an LSAT even once has like looked at some posts on Reddit or some like news headline and been like, oh, that's a flaw. And I've definitely, fallen victim to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you work or go to school while you were studying for the LSAT?
Yeah, so I actually worked quite a bit while studying for the LSAT. That last summer, kind of in that fall, I guess semester, I'll call it, in the fall and the winter,
Yeah.
I worked as a server, quite like a full-time server,
Hmm.
trying to find, a job after undergrad, which I wasn't super successful in beginning because, job market and
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
But I worked as a server pretty consistently. And so my study schedule would look like, kind of, waking up, doing a full section or drilling whatever my course kind of told me to do at that point, or my study plan that I had created based on what the demon recommended, and then go to work, come back. I'd do some drilling if I was sitting in the car at a light or something, um, and Probably shouldn't have been doing that.
That's that's the best. I think that's the best. Like, oh yeah, I snuck in a little bit of drilling story I've heard yet. So,
Yeah, probably wasn't great. But I would sit in bed and do it. Like it got to a point where I was kind of addicted to drilling LR questions where I just sit there and just do them in bed. Because it was just so gratifying to try to learn, and then I'd, hammer out and ask question response if I didn't get it.
yeah.
But then when February hit, right after I actually started taking official tests, I actually got a full-time job offer at a remote company. So I started working there full-time as well as continuing my serving job. And so that kind of, coupled with studying for the LSAT really cut down on my studying time.
Hmm.
And I had to be a lot more selective about how I was studying and what I was studying. And so for me, that kind of looked like, kind of cutting out those moments where I was just drilling haphazardly and, just trying to get the next one right or like get a good score on a practice test. I was really trying to hone in on, what my flaws were, so to speak, towards the higher end of my score range. And so that, I ended up taking less practice tests, but I reviewed them quite a lot more. And I ended up, just trying to be slower and more thoughtful about my studying.
Love that. What would you say is like the best advice that you remember getting while studying for the LSAT?
Yeah, so I actually had a boss when I worked in undergrad at this, random place I was working at. And something he always would say is, do the work. Just, generally it was just, a part-time job. But it
Hmm.
always kind of echoed in my head and stuck with me. And every time I'd be, struggling with something or feel like I was just at a wall or just didn't want to do something and was feeling lazy, that kind of voice would echo in my head of just do the work. And so for anyone who's struggling or kind of, is in the same position that I was, that's just what I'd say. You get out whatever you put into this process. And I really do believe as someone who has, a lower undergraduate GPA, that the LSAT is, kind of a ladder into just a different life entirely. And kind of putting in that work and just doing what you need to do and what you're capable of, will make a mile of difference for you now and in the future.
Well, I can't think of a better conclusion than that, Connor. So thank you so much. I love that advice. You gotta be a serious LSAT student if you want to be a serious candidate and a serious lawyer. So love that advice. Love that advice, Connor. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Best of luck in your application cycle. And for anybody else who has a success story they'd like to tell, feel free to email in at daily@lsatdemon.com. And I look forward to talking to you too. Thanks for listening.